The 21st of May, 1968. Somewhere in the vast, desolate expanse of the central Atlantic, the USS Scorpion, a high-tech nuclear-powered predator of the deep, is heading home. She is a Skipjack-class attack sub, the pinnacle of Cold War engineering. Fast, silent, and lethal. On board are 99 men, dreaming of the Virginia coastline and the families they haven't seen in months. At 11:03 p.m., she sends a routine radio transmission. Everything is normal. The S is fine. 6 days later, she fails to arrive at Norfolk. What followed was one of the largest search operations in naval history, ending not with a rescue, but with a haunting discovery, 11,220 feet below the surface. The Scorpion hadn't just sunk, she had been torn apart. For decades, the Navy maintained it was a tragic accident. But for the families, the veterans, and the acoustic analysts who heard the death rattles of the ship through top-secret hydrophones, the official story has never quite sat right. Was it a hot-run torpedo, a catastrophic battery explosion, or did the Scorpion stumble upon a secret Soviet task force? Today, we go beyond the redacted files to reconstruct the final moments of the USS Scorpion. To understand the end of the Scorpion, we have to understand the pressure cooker of 1968. This was the deadly year of the Cold War. Just months earlier, the USS Pueblo had been seized by North Korea. In March, the Soviet submarine K-129 vanished in the Pacific under mysterious circumstances. The Scorpion was part of a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, but she was also a troubled vessel. To the men who sailed her, she was known as a hard-luck ship. When she pulled out of Norfolk in February 1968 for her Mediterranean deployment, she was carrying a long list of unresolved maintenance issues. She was leaking hydraulic fluid at an alarming rate over 1,500 gallons a month, and her emergency blow system had not been fully upgraded to the sub-safe standards implemented after the loss of the USS Thresher. On her way home, the Scorpion was diverted. Vice Admiral Arnold Shade ordered the sub to observe a Soviet naval task force near the Azores, which included an Echo II-class nuclear submarine and a Russian destroyer capable of tracking U.S. subs. On May 21st, Commander Francis Slattery radioed that they were beginning their surveillance. That was the last the world ever heard from the Scorpion. When a submarine disappears, there are no witnesses and no flight data recorders floating on the surface. However, the Navy had a secret ear. SOSUS, the sound surveillance system. This was a massive network of underwater hydrophones designed to track Soviet movements. While the public was told the Navy had no idea where the Scorpion was, analysts at the Naval Ordnance Laboratory were already looking at a series of strange acoustic events recorded on May 22nd. At 18:59 GMT, SOSUS stations across the Atlantic picked up a singular, massive underwater explosion. This was followed by a series of smaller pulses, the sound of a hull collapsing under the unimaginable weight of the ocean as it sank past its crushed depth. The acoustic signatures showed a bubble pulse. The sun, definitive signature of a high-explosive detonation. This wasn't a slow leak, it was a violent, instantaneous event that occurred long before the ship reached the seafloor. It took 5 months for the USNS Mizar to find her. The Scorpion wasn't in one piece. She was located 400 miles southwest of the Azores, resting in a field of debris that looked like a plane crash. The hull had been snapped in two. The sail had been ripped off and lay discarded in the silt. The bow section, containing the torpedo tubes, was found a significant distance from the stern section, which had telescoped into itself like a crushed soda can. This physical evidence created an immediate contradiction with the Navy's initial theories. If it was a simple mechanical failure or a flooding event, the wreckage should have been more localized. The fact that the ship was shattered into major segments before it ever hit the bottom suggests that the black box of acoustic data is the only true witness we have to the violence that occurred 11,000 feet down. The investigation into the wreckage revealed a chilling detail. The submarine was facing east when it was lost, despite the fact that it was supposed to be traveling west toward Norfolk. This 180-degree turn is a critical piece of the puzzle. In submarine warfare, a 180-degree turn is the standard emergency procedure for a hot-run torpedo, a weapon that has accidentally activated inside its tube. By turning the ship sharply, the crew hopes to trigger a safety mechanism in the torpedo that prevents it from arming. This led the initial court of inquiry to focus heavily on the Mark 37 torpedoes the Scorpion was carrying. These weapons used a silver-zinc battery that was known to be volatile. If one of those batteries overheated and cooked off, it could have triggered a catastrophic explosion within the torpedo room, blowing the bow open and sending the ship on its final, vertical plunge into the abyss. The theory of the hot-run torpedo remains one of the most debated aspects of the Scorpion disaster among naval historians and acoustic experts. To understand the gravity of this, one must look at the Mark 37 torpedo itself, a wire-guided, acoustic homing weapon that was the backbone of the submarine fleet's arsenal. Internal Navy memos, some only coming to light years after the sinking, revealed that the Mark 37 had a terrifying flaw: its silver-zinc battery. These batteries were prone to a phenomenon called thermal runaway, where a small internal short could cause the battery to heat up to thousands of degrees in seconds, potentially igniting the warhead or blowing the torpedo tube door open. If Commander Slattery realized a torpedo was hot in the tube, his first instinct would have been to execute an immediate 180-degree turn to activate the torpedo's anti-runaround safety feature. This perfectly matches the physical orientation of the wreckage found on the seabed, pointing back toward the Mediterranean, away from home. However, the wreckage analysis by the Navy's structural experts introduced a massive complication to the torpedo theory. When the MESAR took thousands of photographs of the debris field, the black box of structural data showed that the torpedo room appeared largely intact from the outside. If a 600-pound high-explosive warhead had detonated inside the submarine, the bow should have been splayed outward like a peeled banana. Instead, the photographs showed the torpedo room had survived the initial event, only to be crushed later by the extreme pressure of the descent. This led a second group of investigators to look elsewhere, specifically at the massive battery that powered the entire submarine. Located directly beneath the galley, the main storage battery was composed of 126 large cells. If a hydrogen explosion occurred here, a constant danger in lead-acid battery systems, it could have incapacitated the crew and ruptured the hull without the massive outward blast of a weapon. While the Navy pushed the internal accident narrative, a darker theory began to circulate within the intelligence community: the Soviet connection. In 1968, the Cold War was not a cold conflict beneath the waves. It was a series of aggressive, high-speed intercepts. Some researchers point to the fact that the Scorpion had been ordered to spy on a Soviet task force just days before her disappearance. They argue that the acoustic event recorded by SOSUS wasn't a battery blowing up, but the impact of a Soviet torpedo. Proponents of this theory highlight the presence of a Soviet Echo II-class submarine in the area, which was known to be harassing U.S. vessels. Under this scenario, the 180-degree turn wasn't an attempt to disarm a faulty weapon, but a frantic maneuver to evade an incoming Russian torpedo. The Navy has consistently denied any evidence of hostile action, yet the fact remains that the Scorpion's mission was highly sensitive, and the Soviet fleet was operating in an unusually aggressive posture that week. The most chilling piece of data comes from the acoustic analysis of the Scorpion's death report, which studied the precise timing of the sounds recorded by the hydrophones. Analysts noted that the first explosion was followed by a 91-second silence, then a series of 15 distinct events, the sounds of the hull collapsing. This 91-second gap is haunting. It suggests that after the initial catastrophe, the Scorpion was still under control, or at least its crew was alive and fighting for their lives as they descended into the dark. They would have been watching their depth gauges spin past the red line, hearing the groans of the steel frame as the Atlantic began to squeeze the ship. The structural analysis of the stern section shows that it eventually telescoped into the machinery room with such force that it compressed the entire section by 50 feet in a fraction of a second. This black box of physical telemetry tells us that the end was mercifully fast for those still alive, but the path to that moment was a terrifying 11,000-foot plunge. Despite the official findings of the Court of Inquiry, the case of the USS Scorpion is far from closed for many who served during that era. In the years following the disaster, several high-ranking officers and technical experts have stepped forward to challenge the Navy's conclusions. They point to the sub-safe program, or the lack thereof on the Scorpion, as the real culprit. After the Thresher was lost in 1963, the Navy began a rigorous program to ensure every hull penetration could withstand a failure. But because of the heavy operational demands of the Cold War, the Scorpion was granted a waiver. She went to sea with old-style valves and a propulsion system that many believed was a ticking time bomb. For the veterans who look at the data today, the mystery isn't just about what exploded. It's about why a ship in such poor material condition was sent on a high-stakes intelligence mission in the first place. In the decades following the wreckage discovery, the black box of evidence was reopened by a new generation of analysts using modern signal processing. In 2003, a group of scientists revisited the SOSUS tapes using advanced algorithms that didn't exist in 1968. Their findings threw a wrench into the Navy's long-held hot-run torpedo theory. The data suggested that the initial explosion didn't come from the torpedo room at all, but rather from the center of the ship. This shifted the focus back to the massive storage battery. Under certain conditions, a lead-acid battery can outgas hydrogen at a rate that becomes explosive. If a spark from a ventilation fan or a short circuit ignited that gas, the resulting blast would be localized but devastating, potentially rupturing the pressurized hull or incapacitating the bridge crew instantly. This would explain why the ship began its uncontrolled descent without an external hull breach being visible in early photos. The mystery is further complicated by the missing photographs and the testimony of those who worked in the Navy's secretive intelligence wings. Dr. John Craven, the mastermind behind the search for the Scorpion, famously argued for the torpedo theory, but he also noted strange discrepancies in the debris field. He pointed out that the mechanical telegraphs, the devices used to signal speed to the engine room, were found in a specific position that indicated the ship was trying to back full or reverse. This is not the action of a crew dealing with a simple leak. It is the action of a crew trying to stop a ship that is diving out of control or trying to maneuver away from a perceived threat. The fact that the stern and bow were separated by such a great distance on the seabed suggests that the hull didn't just break. It may have suffered a catastrophic structural failure while still at high speed, causing the ship to literally tear itself apart before it hit the bottom. For many Cold War veterans, the most stinging part of the Scorpion story is the waiver. Documents declassified in the 1,990 seconds confirmed that the Scorpion had been deferred from critical subsafe upgrades to save time and money during the height of the Vietnam War and the Atlantic standoff. Specifically, the submarine lacked the modernized seawater valves and the emergency main ballast tank blow system that could have saved her from a minor flooding incident. The black box of naval bureaucracy reveals a ship that was pushed to the limit, operating with a run-to-failure mentality. When the Scorpion failed to arrive in Norfolk on May 27th, the Navy initially told the families she was simply delayed. It was only when the acoustic data became undeniable that the truth came out. This perceived lack of transparency has fueled decades of skepticism regarding the official cause of the sinking. The human element of the Scorpion analysis remains the most profound. Among the wreckage, 11,000 feet down lies a small, distorted piece of metal that was once the ship's galley. Found near it were personal effects, letters, boots, and tools that serve as a grim reminder that this isn't just a data-driven mystery, but a graveyard. The 99 men of the Scorpion were seasoned professionals, led by a commander who was widely respected for his caution. To suggest that they simply lost control due to a maintenance error is often seen as an insult to their proficiency. This is why the Soviet attack theory persists. It provides a narrative of combat and sacrifice rather than one of administrative negligence. However, without a physical recovery of the torpedo tubes or the battery well, we are left only with the haunting, low-frequency echoes of the SOSUS tapes. Ultimately, the USS Scorpion serves as a sobering lesson in the limits of technology and the unforgiving nature of the deep ocean. Whether it was a rogue battery, a faulty torpedo, or a silent enemy, the result was the same: the loss of a frontline defender in the dark of the Atlantic. Modern forensic engineering continues to look at the Scorpion case as the gold standard for acoustic reconstruction. Every time a modern submersible or aircraft goes missing, the lessons learned from the search for the Scorpion, how sound travels through the SOFAR channel, and how wreckage creates a footprint on the abyssal plain are applied. The black box of the Scorpion is never truly closed. It is a living document that continues to evolve as our ability to listen to the ocean improves. As we look at the photos of the shattered hull today, we see more than just twisted steel. We see the cost of the Cold War. The silence of the Scorpion is a reminder that in the depths of the ocean, there is no room for error, and some secrets are buried so deep that even the most advanced analysis may never fully bring them to the surface. The 99 men remain on eternal patrol, and while the technical debate over the 180-degree turn and the bubble pulse will continue in the halls of the Naval War College, the legacy of the Scorpion remains one of duty, mystery, and a sacrifice that helped define an era of silent warfare. The forensic reconstruction of the Scorpion's final minutes requires us to look at the acoustic signature of the sinking not as a single event, but as a timeline of mechanical failure. When the Naval Research Laboratory analyzed the SOSUS tapes from stations as far away as Newfoundland and the Canary Islands, they identified a series of distinct sounds that had been hidden by ambient ocean noise for decades. The first sound, the initiation event, was followed by a period of eerie quiet that lasted roughly 90 seconds. To a submarine veteran, that 90-second window is the most haunting part of the data. It suggests that for a minute and a half, the 99 men on board were not yet dead. They were likely in a state of general emergency, battling a massive influx of water or a fire, while the ship began a steep, unrecoverable angle of descent. This period of silent struggle is what modern analysts use to discount the theory of an instantaneous hull failure at operational depth. If the hull had simply zipped open due to a structural defect, the acoustic record would have shown a single, massive implosion. Instead, we have a story of a ship that fought to stay afloat before the physics of the abyss took over. The debate over the hot-run torpedo is further complicated by the internal politics of the Navy's Bureau of Ships during the late 60s. At the time, the Mark 37 torpedo was the crown jewel of the anti-submarine arsenal, but it was a weapon with a dark secret. The silver zinc batteries used in these torpedoes were known to be unstable under certain temperature conditions. Declassified memos now reveal that there had been several incidents involving these batteries on other submarines, where the battery would spontaneously overheat, leading to a venting of toxic gas and high-intensity heat. If this happened on the Scorpion, the crew would have been forced to flood the torpedo tube to cool the weapon. However, if the battery fire had already breached the internal seals of the torpedo, flooding the tube could have triggered a steam explosion or a sympathetic detonation of the warhead. The 180-degree turn recorded by the SOSUS sensors is the strongest circumstantial evidence for this scenario. In the standard operating procedures of 1968, turning the boat was the only way to break the acoustic homing logic of a torpedo that had accidentally activated. The fact that the Scorpion was found pointing toward the east remains the most damning piece of evidence against the Navy's later attempts to blame a simple battery explosion in the galley. But what if the threat didn't come from within? To understand the Soviet confrontation theory, we have to look at the task force. The Scorpion was sent to intercept. This wasn't just any group of ships. It included a Soviet Echo-2 class submarine and a destroyer equipped with experimental sonar. Intelligence reports from the period, many still partially redacted, suggest that the Soviet Navy was frustrated by the U.S. Navy's ability to track their boomers ballistic missile subs. There is a persistent theory among former intelligence officers that the Scorpion was pinged by a high-intensity Soviet sonar that may have caused a malfunction in the sub's delicate electronic systems, or worse, that the Scorpion was engaged in a game of chicken that turned lethal. If a Soviet torpedo had been fired, the Scorpion would have turned away to put the noise of its own screws between itself and the incoming threat again, explaining that 180-degree turn. While no physical evidence of a Soviet weapon, like shrapnel from a Russian torpedo, has been officially identified in the debris field, critics point out that the Navy controlled all the photography of the wreckage, and the most sensitive photos of the torpedo room have never been released to the public. Then there is the issue of the telescoping effect found in the wreckage of the machinery room. When the Scorpion finally reached her crush depth, estimated to be around 2,000 feet, the pressure of the Atlantic became so great that the steel hull could no longer support the weight of the water. In a fraction of a second, the stern section was forced into the larger diameter of the midsection. This is a phenomenon known as hydrostatic implosion. The data from the black box of structural debris shows that the force of this implosion was equivalent to several tons of TNT. This event would have happened with such speed, roughly the speed of sound in water, that the crew would not have had time to process the sensation of the hull failing. For the families of the 99, this is the only small mercy the data provides. The actual transition from a struggling ship to a shattered wreck was instantaneous once the crush depth was breached. To many who served in the silent service, The Scorpion is a symbol of a broader systemic failure within the Navy during a period of intense pressure. The 1,960 seconds were a time when the operational tempo was at an all-time high. Submarines were being asked to stay out longer, dive deeper, and take more risks to counter the Soviet threat. The SubSafe program, which was supposed to be the safety net for the fleet, was often bypassed for mission-critical reasons. The Scorpion had earned the nickname USS Scrap Iron among some of its crew members due to the constant mechanical issues. This wasn't just gallows humor, it was a reflection of the ship's material state. The fact that the Scorpion was sent into a high-threat environment with a leaking hydraulic system and an outdated emergency blow system is, in the eyes of many technical analysts, the root cause of the disaster, regardless of whether a torpedo or a battery was the final trigger. In the final analysis, the USS Scorpion remains a black box mystery because the deep ocean is a perfect vault for secrets. At 11,000 feet, the pressure, the darkness, and the silt preserve the wreckage. But they also prevent the kind of exhaustive, hands-on forensic investigation that we see in land-based accidents. Every few years, a new researcher or a retired acoustic expert comes forward with a new interpretation of the SOSUS tapes, claiming to have found the smoking gun that proves a Soviet attack or a torpedo failure. Yet, the ocean keeps its own counsel. The mystery of the Scorpion isn't just a technical puzzle to be solved. It is a reminder of the human cost of the Cold War. The 99 men who died were not just numbers on a manifest. They were fathers, sons, and brothers who were operating at the very edge of human capability. Their legacy is a safer submarine fleet today, as the lessons learned from the Scorpion's black box led to radical changes in how the Navy manages its nuclear assets and weapon safety protocols. As we conclude this investigation, we are left with the image of the Scorpion resting in the absolute silence of the North Atlantic. The death event, recorded in 1968, was the last time the ship made a sound, but the echoes of that event continue to resonate through the history of the U.S. Navy. Whether the truth is a tragic mechanical fluke or a hidden act of war, the Scorpion stands as a testament to the risks of the deep. For the veterans watching, for the families who still remember, and for the historians who pore over the redacted files, the search for the truth is a way of honoring the 99 men who never came home. The black box may never be fully unlocked, but the story of the Scorpion will never be forgotten.